says is it's the world we live in now. It just is what is. With a predicament, you're not going back. There's no return to something. You can only move through what is and what's becoming. Sanders puts it really starkly when he says, the systems that our lives, every one of us who are probably over the age of 18, sitting in this room, the system our lives were built around were designed for a simpler world. They were not designed for the moment we find ourselves in. They weren't equipped for the tech explosion and other parts of our world. And I posed a question. I said, if this might be true, that we're living in a predicament and not a problem, what should our aim be as people of faith? So I wanted to start today by sharing some of what was shared with me over the last week. Now, a number of you reached out after Sunday's sermon, more than usual. I always get a couple of notes after a sermon, but this sermon from last week, I can tell that I touched something because I got more responses than usual. And what I want you to hear me say is that what was really striking was how different the responses were. And I can put them mostly in two camps of responses, which I also think is interesting feedback. Some people in the congregation and who were listening online felt energized by the language of last Sunday and Cody's analysis. Some people said it felt like possibility pursuing was the language, the syntax they needed to move through the world as it currently is. Words they had been waiting for without realizing it. Others, the other response I got, were people who sort of were pushing back and were saying, no. Problems can be solved and predicaments can be unsnarled with patience and persistence. Our job is to stay alert and keep working with the systems we have. Keep problem solving. And I want to hold both those responses this morning. The response that said, we just have to keep working with what is. There's a way to get back to something better. And the people who said, oh, yeah, I hear it. We're not going back. How do we live into something different? I want to hold both of those responses because I think they reveal something really important about where we are as a community. Some of us hear predicament and we felt a sense of relief, right? Oh, yeah. That's what's happening. That's what I'm feeling. That's what I'm trying to react to. Others hear the word predicament, and we feel like what we're being asked to do from the pulpit is give up on the tools that have always worked for us. To abandon the systems that we have spent our lives building and believing in. The institutions we've spent our lives trusting will hold us. If the sermon felt uncomfortable to you, I want to say gently, that might be the point. Yeah. Because if all we're doing when we come to church is feeling good, patting ourselves on the back, and thinking, this is a great sermon for my mother-in-law to hear, then we have missed the point altogether. And I frankly am astonished that for some of you, this is the first time I seem to have said something that you're like, oh, no. Too far, Jen. Look, the gospel has always been disruptive. It's supposed to unsettle us, not leave us in the unsettled space, but to open us up to something new. So if you are just now starting to feel uncomfortable by something I've said from the pulpit, that's important feedback for me. And I want to root this again in the scripture we started with this morning by remembering that the book of Revelation was written to wake a church up, a community that had become complacent, that had a reputation for being alive, but in fact, they weren't making any difference in the world at all. It was written to comfortable Christians who had grown secure in their rightness. This week I wrote to you in the newsletter. Did some of you see it? Raise your hand. I need to know. I need to know if you read your news. See, this is also important feedback. Okay? I said, I'm not asking you to abandon problem solving. We will always need skills of problem solving. I'm asking whether problem solving is sufficient for the moment we find ourselves in, whether the systems we've trusted were designed for a world that no longer exists, and whether fidelity to those systems might be keeping us from seeing what is possible. Do you also remember that last week we looked at the 5 stages of a continuum of awareness? We talked about stage 1 through stage 5. Cody Sanders says being fully awake is a precondition of stage 5. And when you're in stage 5, that fully awakeness can actually feel like despair. But despair is not the antithesis of hope. It is a precondition of hope. As long as we're clinging to optimism, which is something the earlier stages, that's one of the hallmarks of those earlier stages, the clinging to optimism, the belief that things will somehow work out if we just keep doing what we've been doing. If we're holding on to that kind of optimism, we cannot access the deeper hope that comes only when you have been willing to look reality squarely in the face. So I want to continue, as I promised, with Sanders' work and begin answering or attempting to answer that question we sat with last week. The question is not just what's happening out there in the world, but what's happening in us, right? What kind of people are we becoming as we become shaped by polycrisis? And what kind of people might we need to become to live in this world? Cody calls what follows Christendom collapse Christianity. He says, in the polycrisis, we are living in a world of collapse. And so Christianity for collapse is what we're moving into. The answer to collapse is not just resistance, it is formation. So here's a framework for thinking about this. There are 3 dimensions of belonging that can sustain us through collapse. I noticed that our bulletin this morning has some blank pages. Or near the back, there's a very blank page and a doodle page. So if you want to take notes, look. And this is maybe one of the notes that I would make, things to think about. 3 dimensions of belonging that can sustain us through a collapse. The first is transcendence. Belonging to the transcendent. In our tradition, in this space, we often use God. It could be the holy, it could be the divine, however you understand the transcendent. The idea that we belong not just to ourselves, but to the transcendent. It's a vertical dimension of belonging, right? It's what grounds us in something bigger, something outside of ourselves, when everything seems to be shifting around us. In a time when power seems overwhelming, when the news cycle seems to be saying Caesar is Lord, look, here's proof. Transcendence reminds us that he is not. The empire is not ultimate. The market is not ultimate. The algorithm is not ultimate. There is a reality beyond what we can measure and control. The biblical witness says it this way in the beginning of the New Testament. In the time of Herod, the kingdom of love was born. Maybe that's another note. Belonging to the transcendent means, in the time of Herod, the kingdom of love was born. It's not escapism, it's the opposite. Transcendence frees us from a captivity to the present order. It makes it possible for us to imagine something genuinely new, not just an improved version of what already is or has been, but something we don't yet have concepts or language for. I meant to look this up this morning because I realized, do you ever realize sometimes you say things just like a colloquialism or something, and you think, wait, did I make that up, or is that a real thing? Is it real to say a rabbit trail? Okay, well, what I'm actually looking for is, when you go on this diversion, you're like, oh, what's that? What is that? What'd you say, Alice? A bunny. Okay, so close. A bunny trail. I don't know. What I mean is, I got diverted in a number of ways on the internet this week. Detour. I don't know. I was following this link to that link to that link to that link. Where I ended up is Trevor Noah's podcast. Does anyone listen to Trevor Noah's podcast? Okay, number of people. Whoa, Jennifer, you and I maybe were on the same. Yeah. Bunny trail, something. Yeah. Okay. The whole. I'm gonna say no. I guarantee you, this will be what you remember from this sermon. Trevor Noah, and this is for me it was kind of difficult because Trevor Noah is a comedian, right? He's very smart and very savvy, but he's a comedian, and his friend Edward hosts with him, and Eugene, and the two of them just it's sometimes hard to follow Anyway, but I stuck with it. Okay, so Trevor had Zora Mandami on his podcast. Do you listen to that one too? We're really in the exact same space. It's a Jennifer thing. Yeah. Okay, so Zora, they were talking about a lot of things, and you should listen to it. But they were talking about why progressives struggle to inspire people. And Trevor made an observation. Every interviewer, very, very different things than she does, right? Yeah, but you remain in conversation with him. And recently you told me that instead of getting into arguments about your different points of view, you have found common ground to say, well, here's an issue. How do you feel about this? Or what's important to you? Tell me how that has gone for you.
It's going well. She hasn't heard any raised voices from her phone calls.
Karen has not heard any raised voices from their phone calls.
Recently he said to me, don't assume you know how I feel. I'm not on the far left or the far right. And then when I told him what we were doing in church and then maybe attending one of those trainings, he said, it's good what you're doing, but be very careful. And so he's gone around from criticizing to just warning me, and I don't press him. I don't say, what do you think about this?
Right.
Trump is doing this.
Right.
We don't.
You don't get into a fight with him.
No specific political thing.
Yeah.
I talk about the Christian basis of it because he's also a Christian.
So you found another anchor point to talk about and that raised voice actually able to conversation with each other about what's important that's happening in the world. That is one way that Mary demonstrates being able to expand our conversation. And evil is present in our news feeds every single day. We have to entertain which we have to find news of the holy. Find news of the holy. Outside, Daphne says. Poetry. Krista, maybe a good cast, maybe a good book. Fiction. What's that? Babies. Yeah. Disconnect maybe from some of those things that are feeding you a particular train of thought and find something else to tether to. Find something else to tether to. Brian also, has offered us a way to examine what we think about normalcy bias and who we're paying attention to and how we're listening. I just want to remind us that there was a very powerful moment in our time together last week. Okay, we got to move on. I want to talk about being muscles. Being muscles are tools that need to situate ourselves. They help us situate within our context. our narratives, our values, our commitments. They root us relationally. Being muscles root us relationally. It's about paying attention to like where do we put our attention? Who are we giving our attention to? Or what sources of media are we giving our attention to? How are we spending time in our minds? And asking what forms us. As Keith has said before, every single one of us is being spiritually formed, whether we intend to be or not. So are you paying attention to what is spiritually forming you? What might it look like to strengthen the muscles that create your formation? Mm. Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Yeah, you're strengthening that being muscle. Jen is saying that she read a book by a theologian, Friedrich Buechner, that inspired her to create more space and quiet in her mind, in her world. And that's one way of strengthening the being muscle, by doing daily practice, reading, journaling, being quiet in prayer, being outside, showing up. Because practice is a point. Practice is a point. Oh, it's this. It's not a detour. So the time that you spend in worship, come to a small group hosted by this community, it's not something like, oh, look, this is my life. But I guess I could take an hour out of my schedule to come do this thing. Ritual is not a detour. It's a technology we use to stay human in the face of systems that grind us down. I want to make a distinction. I'm not talking about wellness. I'm not talking about self-care. Okay, doing muscles. Doing muscles are tools that help us position ourselves in relationship to challenges we face. Okay, this is what we're most familiar with. We know how to do. But I don't mean technical problem solving. I mean collective efficacy. The confidence a group has that it can meet the challenges before it. It's a good question to ask ourselves as a congregation. Do we have confidence that no matter what happens as a community, we can face the challenges that come to us? It's about learned helpfulness, which asks not how do we fix it, but what can we do? What can we be ready to do? Knowledge, we have being all represented in near future. That is very different. How do it? So we can it. But that the field will be different. In that, what do we offer? So it's going to ask yourself, okay, who are 5 people? Who are 5 that I call at 2 a.m. in the morning? Live on the other side of the truck. If you have Christ and you 5 people show up at 2 a.m. in the morning, you're going to call. This is like practical. Practical skill could you if you don't have to follow in this generation, they do know how to. You know how, I don't know, Jerry knows how to Jerry a lot of things they could teach. You're a skill. What a nice Valentine you are. Well, we might need to borrow Jerry. People in this congregation know how to prepare food. People in the congregation know how to, they know how to host people. Here's the story I want to tell. Basically saying is we all have muscles that we need to strengthen in this area, and we all have particular gifts in this area. I know we do. Here are some of the gifts present in congregation doing musculature. Keith and Dad know how to host. They know how to make people feel welcome and take them into their home and cook for them, help them relax, help them slow down, right? This is a particular skill that you might feel natural to you. There's so many of us who do not have that skill or utilize it. Keith and Daphne could be teachers for some of us. How do you do this? How do you do it well? Rhonda, that a couple of weeks ago, you had dinner at your house several times. You took that invitation I made seriously, and you invited people to come over. Other people in the congregation lit keys in their neighborhood or cooked dinner. Kim took a pie, an apple pie, to neighbors that she didn't know very well. That is one of those, that's a way we can strengthen this doing muscle. I'm going to tell you the people in this congregation that I actually think know this muscle the best are the Robertsons. Sally and Terry show up for anyone at any point in time and do just about anything. And they're people I know people in the neighborhood. And you have sacrificed time and energy, time and time again, to take care of people in your neighborhood. Like, be above and beyond. They have relationships with people moved into living. Like, Sarah's going to fix some computer or do this work. That's a huge gift in our congregation, and something that we might not know about because they don't carry signs around saying this is the work we do, but they are people we can learn from. So I've just pointed out some of the places in our congregation where we have this efficacy going on. Last week I asked you to sit with a question of what should our aim be? If this is the world we're in, what should our aim be? And here's my answer. Our aim should not be how do we solve the polycrisis. Our aim is to become the kind of people and the kind of community that can remain faithful inside of it. That means strengthening these three belongings, strengthening transcendence, strengthening belonging to each other, and strengthening our tethering. Grounding ourselves in transcendence, right? So that we're not captive to the empire story. So that we don't automatically feel a rush of anxiety every time we turn on the news. Building togetherness so that we can survive whatever is coming. And tethering ourselves to the web of life so we remember we're not alone and we may not be even the smartest beings in this cosmos. Remembering that our fate is tied up with every living thing. And it means developing these muscles that we talked about, knowing, being, doing, that will let us respond with wisdom and love rather than fear and despair. It's not a 5-step plan. I'm sorry to disappoint. I didn't tell you exactly what to do tomorrow morning. And that's the point, because we're not in a situation that yields to 5-step plans. I believe we are in a predicament that will transform us one way or another. Judah.
I wanted to share, I've been kind of a mess, and being a trans person in the world isn't that much fun right now. And the simple love and relationships that I've made with people here is allowing me to be transformed by love instead of fear, and it's not
It's things like going with Cheryl to Marion's poetry reading. And probably a simple exchange in the sanctuary on a Sunday morning. That what Judah just said is, I think, the most powerful thing we can pay attention to. When I said last week, not many of us, I don't think, can say we're actually living in terror. Judah's a person who lives in terror and is saying that the act of loving, of knowing, of being, of doing, of being willing to pay attention is transforming him through a pathway of love so that he's not being transformed by terror. Is that fair to say? Thank you. That's it. That's our job. That's how to be in the world. And today,